Air Force test pilot Joe Engle, painting the X-15 and a significant moment in his career. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Celebrating Aviation with Mike Machat. Today, we're going to look at a painting entitled First Re-Entry. This is a depiction of X-15 Ship 3 landing at Edwards Air Force Base on Joe Engle's Astronaut Wings flight of June 29th, 1965. Joe is seen here at extreme right with this group of X-15 pilots. He was born in Chapman, Kansas, became an Air Force pilot in the early 60s, was assigned to the test pilot school at Edwards in 1961, and then to the X-15 program in 1963 at the age of 30 years old, making him the youngest pilot to ever fly the X-15. His Astronaut Wings flight was made at age 32, and he became the youngest person to ever qualify for astronaut at that time. He was a fighter pilot originally, flying F-84, F Thunderstreaks, and F-100 Super Sabres, like the one seen here. And then he was assigned to the X-15 program, making 16 flights total in the airplane. But on the morning of Tuesday, June 29th, 1965, he strapped into X-15 Ship 3, seen here taking off with its NB-52B mothership, flown by famous Edwards test pilot Fitz Fulton, known as father of the motherships. They climbed to altitude. Joe released from the 52 and flew into the history books, making a flight to 280,600 feet. He achieved a top speed of Mach 4.94, or 3,432 miles per hour. And the total flight time was 10 minutes and 32 seconds. So let's look at a typical research flight with the X-15 reaching record altitudes. The peak altitude of the X-15 program was flown by NASA pilot Joe Walker, and the airplane reached a peak altitude of 354,000 feet. On Joe's flight, he launched from Edwards. The B-52 took about an hour and a half to reach Smith Ranch, Nevada, made a 180-degree turn, launched the X-15. The rocket plane went into a ballistic climb. The engine ran for about 90 seconds, and then it coasted up to 280,000 feet. The definition of space is 50 miles, which computes to 264,000 feet, and that is what creates the altitude flights for the astronaut wing qualification. So I wanted to do a painting of the landing of this flight, and this is a photo of Joe flying X-15 Ship 1 in 1963. It's a nice view of the airplane. It's a nice, sleek machine. You can see it reaching for the lake bed, but not very dramatic. And then there was this photo. It's a NASA photo of Ship 3 landing with the F-104 Chase. And it's got all the elements of a neat painting, but the airplanes are in the wrong place. I didn't like the 104 in front of the X-15, and the green smoke wasn't working for me, and it needed something different. So the first order of business was to create the X-15 in detail and learn the airplane from the inside out. So this is what I call an engineering drawing. And then this is refined into what we call the final detail drawing. I was correcting a lot of the camera distortion. There was telephoto foreshortening and other things happening. I left some of that in for dramatic effect, but corrected most of it. And then this allows me to really learn the airplane and find out about all the markings and prepare to render it tightly and accurately. So this is a black and white image of the final art, and I'm going to use this as a schematic to show you how the painting is composed. I'd actually be working with line drawings at this point, but again, for the purpose of this program, I'm going to show this to you in rendered form. We've got the X-15 and the F-104 Chase, and what is going to make or break this painting is the exact positioning of the two airplanes in space. What you see there in white is referred to as negative space, and that's the empty space around the objects, which can be more powerful than the shape of the objects themselves. And we're going to see how that's going to work. So by slowly positioning these two airplanes and creating a spatial relationship between the two, I was able to come up with a formation that actually created speed and the feeling of the X-15 sinking toward the lake bed. And when you put it into color and look at the final image, the X-15 flies the approach at 300 knots. It flares for landing and touches down at 190. So in this particular moment, it's doing about 250, 260 knots, sinking toward the lake bed. The 104 is applying power, closing the speed brakes. It's going to pull the gear up and about to go around. The purpose of the 104 chase at this point is to call out the exact altitude for the X-15 pilot, who has restricted visibility with the smaller windshield, and especially at a high AOA as he's landing, the angle of attack, he's unable to see over the nose. So the 104 performs a very critical role in orienting the pilot to the lake bed. But again, the X-15 is really moving visually, and I'm going to show you a very interesting phenomenon. But there's a problem, a visual problem. I'd mentioned that there's always rules in art and things you're not supposed to do and things to avoid. And one of the things to avoid is putting a dead vertical right in the center of a composition. So I've got the trailing edge of the upper and lower vertical fins, and technically that's kind of a no-no in art world, and yet it's working for this painting, because on the left side of that line is a bold black and white shape against a light blue sky, and on the right side is a lot of light blue sky with a small metallic shape, and it's visually balanced. So we're actually good to go. Now, as I mentioned, the 104 plays a pivotal, if not critical, role in making these two airplanes fly the way they're supposed to look in the painting. I'm going to remove the 104 using Photoshop, and watch what happens to the X-15. It stops dead. It's pinned to the background, frozen in space, and very, very undesirable in terms of trying to get things to show speed and movement. But I'll put the 104 back in, and now that X-15 is doing about 250 knots and heading for the lake bed in short order. Pretty powerful. There are four elements to the 104 that, again, help it play this critical role in the composition. The first is the relationship of the tip of the pitot boom on the nose of the airplane to the trailing edge of the stabilator and skid on the X-15. That's a critical visual relationship, and you can see that it's exactly halfway up or down between those two pieces of structure. The second item that you see there in red is a perfect triangle that's formed from hangar 4 at North Base, seen in the background, and it winds up at the apex of the national insignia star on the 104 air intake. And this becomes a very powerful visual pull of the 104 to the building. It actually stops it or slows it down. But wait, there's more. If you look at the billows of red smoke below, now I've created a perfect geometric shape in space. And since there are no perfect geometric shapes in nature, this becomes, again, a very powerful visual element. The third thing is the critical relationship between the nose wheel and the top of that mountain in the background. What we're doing here is creating spatial tension between the wheel and the landmass. And again, that creates a tension that slows the airplane down and makes it work a certain way. When you combine that with the exhaust trail, again, the airplane's putting in power on the General Electric J79, and it's arcing the way you see it there, holding the airplane up as it starts to climb out. And between the mountain and that exhaust trail, you've got some very powerful visual elements. So here's the airplane without it, and what you're looking at is two airplanes flying along in formation. But let me add the mountain and that exhaust, and now the 104 slows down and the X-15 speeds up, and you've got the look of the painting. The last thing to talk about is the background. This was really tricky. Just like landing the X-15 or any glider, you only have one try and you have to do it right the first time. So in this case, to create that mirage effect and the speed effect, I painted the entire background in perfect detail, sharp, crisp edges, everything defined, all the detail in there, the aircraft ground equipment that you see there in yellow, everything was painted in just the way it would look. And using a 2-inch wide white sable brush, using eggshell pressure. I drew the brush along the painting from left to right in one continuous stroke, and that picked up all the wet oil paint, which has about 20 minutes to set, and it just blurred it the way you see there and created the speed and the effect of the mirage. When that paint dried, I then went in with a thin blue pinstripe that you see there, separating the upper and lower elements of the background. And then that became the lake bed shimmering in the background, and that's what made the mirage effect. Tricky, but it worked. So here we see Joe after the flight. Canopy's up, his helmet visor's up, he's got his pressure suit plugged into the cooling unit, and he's ready to get out of the airplane. And here he is outside the airplane. I'd like to call your attention to the markings that you see there on the nose. That would be the NASA meatball with the NASA logo, but you see that it's actually burned off the airplane. That's a decal that's placed on the airplane for each flight, and it melts during the reentry. You can actually see the angle of the reentry, the way the nose was up when the decal actually burned off the airplane. And this is a photo of the traditional, it's called the mother plane salute. The X-15 makes that trip from Nevada in 10 minutes, and the B-52 takes an hour to return to Edwards, descending the whole time. But it's a tradition that Fitz Fulton and the 52 would call the tower and get permission for a low pass over the lake bed. And this was a salute to the X-15 pilot and crew, ground crew, after each of the 199 flights. So again, the painting is entitled First Reentry. And what's that all about? Joe became an astronaut in 1965 in the X-15, but he later flew the shuttle, in this case, the approach and landing test of the shuttle Enterprise, which never went into space, but proved that the shuttle could land successfully before it was committed to orbit. But on November 14th, 1981, Joe landed the shuttle orbiter Columbia after becoming the first pilot to ever fly a used spaceship, which is a spacecraft that had been in space, returned to Earth, and was used again. He hand flew for the first and only time the reentry, portions of the reentry from Mach 25, or 17,500 miles an hour, to a landing on the lake bed at Edwards in order to generate the flight test data that was used for the automatic landing systems of the subsequent shuttle flights. So this was his second spacecraft that he'd made a reentry into the Earth's atmosphere, and that meant that the X-15 was his first. Here we see Joe, his co-pilot, Commander Dick Truly, and NASA Director of Flight Operations George Abbey as they do their walk around. But again, that leaves the X-15 on that historic date of June 29th, 1965, the day that Joe Engle made his first re-entry. Well, there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. And thank you so much for celebrating aviation with Mike Machad. As always, I'd like to thank the special people that made this painting possible. First and foremost, Major General Joe H. Engle, who recently turned 88 years old. Happy birthday, Joe. And he is now the last surviving X-15 pilot. And also to my dear friends, Dennis Jenkins and Tony Landis, who for me will always be part of the X-15 story. Until next time, take care.